Back in January, the EU realised that there was a pandemic crisis coming, and it began to procure PPE. But it wasn't until March that we cottoned on. And on the 27th of March, the government opened up a public portal saying, look, we really need a lot of PPE. And many of us will remember quite how much heat there was on the government back then to procure PPE. Healthcare workers were wearing ski goggles and dishwashing gloves because they didn't have PPE. And basically what happened is the government went on a sort of £15 billion supermarket sweep. They bought up everything they could get their hands on including from some very odd counterparties and some very odd PPE. And what we've uncovered as one of 4 judicial review proceedings that we're bringing against government in relation to procurement around the pandemic is that one of those contracts, a contract for £252 million, was let, as lawyers say, was given to the vehicle of someone called Andrew Mills. And Andrew Mills is an interesting character because he set up a company called ProsperMill, a pun I suspect that he finds less witty now than he did then, for £100. And that £100 company was about to be given a £252 million contract for PPE. In fact, he asked for it to be placed with a family fund company called Ayanda Capital, which is owned through a tax haven in Mauritius. And we got some correspondence from government a couple of days ago in which government said that of the 2 types of mask that they'd bought, one for about 90 million quid and one for the other 160 million quid. The 160 million quid they spent on masks, they've spent on masks that even they now admit cannot be used in the NHS.
150 million pounds. 150 million.
160 million pounds they spent on respirator masks. So these are the masks that doctors wear to protect themselves from others breathing out the virus. So these are not the masks that you and I are wearing when we go into a shop. They spent 160 million quid or thereabouts on FFP2 masks, to give them their technical title. But those masks only have ear loops, and they're supposed to have head loops. Ear loops don't give a tight enough seal to stop you breathing in.
Well, you can't adjust them. So unless you have an optimal sized head, they're no use to you at all.
That is absolutely right. And the story's not much better, actually, with the other 90 million quid of masks. Those masks are sitting in a warehouse and government hasn't tested them yet. So there's an extraordinary story of public waste.
So that's a total of £252 million contract. And the company that originally offered to supply at ProsperMill, as you said, had been set up the previous year but hadn't even filed any accounts at that point.
Hadn't filed accounts, looked like it was a sort of business consultancy type company rather than a sort of dealer in PPE. No suggestion that it knew anything about PPE. No suggestion that Ayanda, that eventually did enter into the contract at Andrew Mills's request, knew anything about PPE either.
So Ayanda is just a family investment company.
It's a privately held family investment company for the Horlick family,
right?
Held through a tax haven. Mauritius is a sort of particularly grim tax haven, and that's where Ayanda was held through.
Okay. I should add that Mr. Mills has said that he had been finalising his appointment as an advisor to Ayanda when he made the offer, but, and I quote now, informed the health department of the intention to contract through Ayanda as soon as he was in a position to do so. Mr. Horlick has said that he did not believe that Mr. Mills's role as a government advisor had any influence whatsoever on winning his contract. Mr. Mills has added that his position had no effect on the awarding of the contract. The spokesman for the Department of Health and Social Care told the Times last night that they were unable to comment because of ongoing legal proceedings. Jolyon Maugham, you've told this entire story without mentioning that Andrew Mills was a government advisor.
He sat on the Board of Trade, and the Board of Trade used to tell us who its advisors were, but a couple of weeks after I started tweeting about Andrew Mills being an advisor to the Board of Trade, the government took down its list that's shown that Andrew Mills was an advisor. You can still find it on the Wayback Machine, the Web Archive.
It could be a
That's
coincidence. Could be a coincidence, of course. And as I say, Messrs. Horlick and Mills insist that his previous role advising the government had no influence whatsoever on the winning of the contract. So I know you're looking at other cases, and we'll talk again, I hope. What sort of criteria were in place? I mean, let me phrase it mischievously. If you and I had set up a company last year, paid £100 to register it, and then got onto this internet portal and offered to provide them with, a gazillion face masks, what sort of due diligence was being done on these offers, as far as you can tell so far?
Well, the answer plainly is not enough. I mean, I have spoken to a number of people who had no experience of supplying PPE and who months later found themselves chartering multiple 777s to bring PPE back from the Far East, yes, typically around Malaysia where the rubber factories are, to the UK. So I spoke to someone who was involved in developing websites, for example. And the three companies we've sued, there's Ayanda, which, as you mentioned, is a family fund. There's PestFix, which is a pest control company. One of its websites is called pigeonstock.co.uk. And then there's another big £108 million contract to a company called Clanboy, which is a sweets wholesaler in Northern Ireland. Apparently they make very good sweets, but I'm not sure that qualifies them as the appropriate place to place a £108 million PPE contract.
Although I suppose it's the proof is in the pudding. Do you, and we should follow all of these cases with interest, do you, is there where does the buck stop? So if I read you the first line of the Times, ministers have wasted at least £150 million. It packs a punch, but there's no names here. Where would the buck stop? Who would ultimately bear responsibility for essentially, as Boris Johnson would say, spaffing £150 million of our money up the wall?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's a pretty good question. That's really a political question rather than a legal question.
Is it?
As I understand it, procurement, although being carried out by DHSC, by the Department of Health, by Matt Hancock's department, was actually being run from a PPE cell, CELL, in the Cabinet Office.
Right. Oh.
And, it's kind of a piece with a government that is very good at politics, but whose record on delivery is certainly amenable of challenge.
Well, as I say, we'll keep a very close eye on this story. It's strange that the Taxpayers Alliance aren't up in arms, Jolyon Maugham. You'd expect them to be galloping over the hill at any moment, wouldn't you, on a story like this?
You would think that 156 to 177 million pounds of wasted public funds would attract the attention of somebody, of an organisation that was interested in the proper use of taxpayers' funds. But no, I do share your surprise. I also raised an eyebrow in the same general direction.
Perhaps they're all furloughed.